So thanks everyone, and over to you, Victoria.
Great, thank you. So hello, bonjour tout le monde. My name is Victoria, and I was hired by PAFSO to develop a GBA Plus framework for the collective agreement. Through discussions with foreign service officers, PAFSO also decided to deliver a preliminary GBA Plus framework on the FSDs as well. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gathered virtually is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I will be alternating between English and French throughout the presentation. However, all information written on the slides is both in English and in French. Additionally, I've added in 3 pause sections or slides throughout the presentation. If you have any questions or comments during the presentations, please feel free to ask questions or comments during those slides. Sorry, everyone. I'm just trying to move it on to the next slide. There we go. OK, so voici le plan de la présentation. Nous allons commencer avec une petite introduction qui inclut la méthodologie utilisée pour cette cadre analytique. Je vais ensuite présenter les enjeux clés et les recommandations. De plus, nous allons explorer la stratégie des données proposée dans le cadre d'ACS+. Finalement, nous allons conclure la présentation avec une conclusion et une période de questions. Okay, so what was the purpose of developing a GBA Plus framework? In terms of gender, the Foreign Service is not truly equal. However, both Global Affairs Canada and IRCC have made substantial efforts to promote gender equality within their departments. For instance, through the Feminist International Assistance Policy, GAC has adopted a 2017 to 2022 National Action Plan to address the issues of women, peace, and security. Furthermore, the Women's Network at Global Affairs Canada has made great strides in promoting and analyzing gender equality within the department. Additionally, during the 2020-2021 fiscal year, IRCC pledged to continue to advance its GBA Plus implementation, including a strategy to ensure that GBA Plus is integrated into departmental decision-making processes. Donc, qu'est-ce que l'analyse comparative entre les sexes plus? Selon Femmes et Égalité des genres Canada, l'ACS+ est un processus analytique qui fournit une méthode pour évaluer les inégalités systémiques ainsi qu'un moyen de déterminer comment différents groupes de femmes, d'hommes et de personnes de diverses identités de genre peuvent vivre des politiques, programmes et initiatives. Le signe plus dans l'ACS+, reconnaît que nous avons tous de multiples facteurs identitaires comme la race, l'origine ethnique, l'âge, la religion, la langue, qui influencent la manière dont nous pouvons ressentir les politiques et les initiatives gouvernementales. So central to the methodology was the GBA Plus process graph adopted by Women and Gender Equality Canada. You can see it in figure 2. The process that PAFSO followed so far has been the first 4 steps of the process in figure 2. So identifying issues, challenging assumptions, research and consultations, and making recommendations. The next step for PAFSO will be to monitor and evaluate the core issues and recommendations of this framework. Additionally, a mixed methods research approach was adopted. Both qualitative and quantitative research techniques were used to ensure multiple lines of evidence were used. A key component of developing this GBA Plus framework was through key stakeholder interviews and consultations. Semi-structured individual interviews and consultations were conducted with the Women's Network at Global Affairs, the Executive Committee at PAFSO, and with general members of the Foreign Service. Furthermore, PAFSO reviewed documentation and academic literature to gather information related to these GBA Plus strategies. Voici les enjeux clés. Durant la prochaine partie de la présentation, nous allons identifier les enjeux principaux et explorer les recherches intéressantes liées à ces enjeux. Nous allons commencer avec les enjeux ACS+ identifiés dans la convention collective. So Article 2, Interpretation Definitions, was problematic because it dichotomizes gender. It uses discourse such as both genders and alternating the use of feminine and masculine genders. According to the Canadian Institute of Health Research, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they interact, and the distribution of power and resources in society. Gender is not confined to a binary, so girl, woman, boy, man, nor is it static. Discourse such as both genders, alternating the use of feminine and masculine, excludes persons from the FS group who do not identify with the gender binary. Therefore, the recommendation here is to use more inclusive pronouns such as they, or in French, elle. Article 26 on maternity leave. The issue is that women are only entitled to 6 months of maternity leave ad post. This does not reflect the standards adopted by the Government of Canada, which is 40 weeks of benefit during 12 months after the date your child is born or placed with you for adoption, or an extended maternity leave, which is 69 weeks of benefits during the 18 months after the date your child is born or placed with you for adoption. So here the recommendation would be that PAFSO should adopt further research to evaluate if 6 months of maternity leave at post is sufficient. OK, donc le prochain enjeu, c'est l'harcèlement sexuel. Cet article ne reflète pas la définition élargie du harcèlement sexuel dans le projet de loi C-65. Le 1er janvier 2021, le projet de loi C-65 a été introduit en tant que loi modifiant le Code canadien du travail sur le harcèlement de la violence. L'objectif de la nouvelle législation est de créer un environnement sécuritaire pour les travailleurs qui ont été victimes de violences ou de harcèlement de travail. Selon le syndicat canadien de la fonction publique, in English QP, la nouvelle définition du harcèlement et de la violence est toute action, conduite ou commentaire, y compris de nature sexuelle, qui peut raisonnablement s'attendre à causer une offense, une humiliation, une autre blessure ou maladie physique ou psychologique à un employé, y compris toute action, conduite ou commentaire prescrit. Comme a dit un membre exécutif du comité à la base, PAFSO a besoin d'avancer et d'analyser la convention collective sous cette nouvelle définition. Comme a dit le syndicat canadien de la fonction publique, SOQP, le syndicat devrait veiller à ce que les plaignants soient informés de leurs options. Donc, comme recommandation, la convention collective devrait refléter le projet de loi C-65 et devrait contenir des informations nouvelles sur le processus de plainte. Article 51 on religious observance. So as stated by many individuals of the Executive Committee and members of the Foreign Service, the current article on religious observance is not inclusive of religious holidays other than Christian holidays. If your religious holiday is not included in the design paid holidays, you are normally forced to request annual leave. So as recommendations, holidays should align with the 2021 list of religious holidays document by the Ontario Treasury Board Secretariat, which coincides with the next recommendation, which would be that the collective agreement should state, by mutual agreement between the employee and the manager, employees should be able to trade a statutory holiday for their religious holiday. So this would just improve efficiency and effectiveness, all while making it more inclusive. Ici, le soutien pour les conjoints. Ceci est vraiment une lacune dans la convention collective. So it's definitely a gap within the collective agreement. Dans le sondage triennal de 2018, 60,42% des répondants ont indiqué qu'il est critique ou important que leur partenaire obtienne un emploi pendant sa mission. Les deux articles académiques très intéressants par rapport à l'emploi du conjoint durant ma recherche étaient Dual Career Couples During International Relocation and Adaptation of Trailing Spouses, Does Gender Matter? The first one was by Professor Michael Harvey, and it was written in 1998, and the second one was by Anne Braceby, written in 2010. I'll explain the main findings of these research papers in English, since they were both written in English. So in 1998, Michael Harvey conducted a survey of 258 dual career couples and their concerns with willingness to relocate. That survey indicated that 67% of those responding felt that their spouse's reluctance to give up their own career was a major constraint to their international relocation. We can see that not much has changed since 1998. Anne Braisby's paper from 2010 concluded that there were in fact gendered impacts to adaptation of trailing spouses. Men experience an additional burden of adjusting to non-traditional role of house husband, rescinding their role of breadwinner and becoming financially dependent on their wives. They also lack social support because of the scarcity of male trailing spouses and activities of the expatriate community that are more geared towards trailing wives. This puts pressure on women FS officers and contributes to the issue of the double workday or the triple workday. If their male spouse is having a hard time adjusting abroad, more traditional gender inequalities, such as duties of care, will be placed on women. Without such support for spousal employment abroad, trailing spouses are sometimes forced to give up their careers. Braisby concludes that there is additional psychological issues of stress and control placed on women due to these expectations. Donc, comme recommandation, il est recommandé que la PAFSO explore des moyens de soutenir l'emploi des conjoints dans la prochaine convention collective. Il devrait y avoir un système de priorité selon lequel les agents FS ont la priorité pour les affectations dans les postes aux ambassades à l'étranger et où les conjoints doivent être pris en considération pour les postes restants. La PAFSO devrait aussi collecter plus de données sur l'emploi du conjoint ainsi que l'adaptation du conjoint à l'étranger. The next gap in the collective agreement was on emergencies. According to the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada, women with intersecting identities disproportionately bear the burden of emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic. They analyzed how likely are you to be denied 699 leave. What was really great was that 95% of people were granted 699 leave. However, 5% were not. In exploring this, they used an intersectional approach. They also, just as a note, conducted an online survey with 15,336 respondents, 46% being women, 46% being women, 51% being men, and 1% non-binary. Of the 5% that were denied 699 leave, they used the no equity group as a baseline. So this would be white, cisgender, heterosexual men. They found that women were 2 times more likely to be denied 699 leave. Using an intersectional approach, they found that LGBTQ2S+ women were 2.2 times more likely to be denied. Racialized women were 2.8 times more likely to be denied. Indigenous women, 3.5 times more likely to be denied. And women with disabilities were 5 times more likely to be denied 699 leave. So here a key recommendation would be to incorporate an article on emergencies into the next collective agreement. Something along the lines of, in an event of a pandemic or of another emergency, that 699 shall be authorized. Donc ici, le dernier enjeu de la convention collective, c'est le processus d'embauche bilingue qui limite les minorités visibles qui postulent à des postes au service extérieur. Par exemple, les personnes autochtones au Canada ont des opportunités limitées d'apprendre le français. Combien de personnes on peut soutenir une conversation dans les 2 langues officielles du Canada? Seulement 10,5% des personnes autochtones puissent soutenir une conversation dans les 2 langues, comparativement à 17,9% de la reste de la population. On peut voir que les gens autochtones sont déjà désavantagés en manière de promotion dans ce cas-ci. Donc, une recommandation serait d'incorporer un article sur la formation linguistique dans la prochaine convention collective. We'll do a pause for this section because that concluded the collective agreement section. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Not seeing any little hands. Feel free to use your little hands or just, unmute yourself if you want. There's not very many of us, so. I see Hannah has her hand up. Hannah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just have a really quick question about something that was mentioned. It's a little bit off topic, but pertains a little bit more to my work. I think Victoria had mentioned really quickly that there is actually a gender neutral term to refer to they in French. I was just wondering if you could repeat that quickly. I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, so the term is yel. It's I-E-L in French.
I-E-L, and that would replace like they, them in French?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
As I hadn't heard of that before, day before yesterday when we got the preview of Victoria's presentation as well. But
oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, we were actually trying to find it at work. We couldn't quite find it, so very helpful.
Yeah, good to know. Hey, I'm very happy that we at PAFSO can be providing useful info. And thank you to Victoria. And I see Miriam's got her hand up now. Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Ben. Thanks, Victoria. You're speaking a little quickly, so just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the recommendation around spousal employment. I don't think there was a lot of context for that. So I'm wondering how the recommendation came about given the size of Canadian missions and what you mean by spousal employment abroad. Because I don't see the opportunities, so I'm just...
Yeah, so just to be clear though on the parameters of this task for Victoria, this is the framework for our analysis. So it's not actually the analysis itself, right? So she's just been asked to identify issues that we will then be going out to members in our triennial survey and talking to the department about, and identifying where and how exactly we can pursue them. But just go ahead, Victoria, and explain. I know it came up regularly in the discussions, the focus groups that we had, and the interviews with XCOM, which is it was a fairly small sample, right? So which is why this is just a sort of a roadmap for what happens next rather than definitive conclusions for PAFSO.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the point that there's no definitive answer or conclusion to really any of these issues because it is just a framework. But the recommendation here, after discussing with Pam and Kim Coll, the executive directors, we thought that a key recommendation would be to fill FS positions abroad at the embassy and have a priority list. And then once the priority list is filled for FS officers, that the remaining positions would go towards spouses. So that was the key recommendation there. Again, there would probably be way more recommendations than that. That was just a solution that we came up with.
So it's I think we should say more, it's less of a recommendation than an option that we could explore, right? So one option for that is within PAFSO's area of leverage, our area of influence in the collective agreement, would be something like a priority system that said, okay, FS priority for FS positions, and then perhaps consider a priority system where if there are qualified spouses at mission, the certain jobs could be offered to those qualified spouses before going to other groups outside the FS group. We have no idea whether the departments would agree to that, but it is one thing that we could look at proposing as a way of getting some traction on the spousal employment issue. But again, we need to validate all of this and determine whether these are going to be viable to actually go forward in our negotiations or not. I see, Miriam, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful now that I understand. It's just a pointing out of where the gaps are as opposed to actually moving forward with
we're
more
still the framework
detailed.
preliminary.
Okay, thanks.
Logan, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Miriam because I had the same immediate question, because I thought, Victoria, that you had said that it was a gap in the collective agreement. And I was thinking, I don't understand why, but I understand the recommendations. And I think that I would really support that, because I also don't really understand why we would not prioritize spousal or family hiring at the missions. Anyway, I just wanted to add.
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue, right? And, it's very important to our membership, but we do have to be aware as PAFSO that we don't actually represent spouses, right? We only represent people who are hired, currently working in the FS group. So when we're looking at how we can address these issues, this is why we're kind of trying to come up with ways of, there's the advocacy piece, working with the departments, with the employer on, things like making telework at missions abroad, or international telework easier for people who are already employed, like in another government department or in another category or things like that. But that's not anything that we are going to be able to address in our own areas of control in the FSDs or in the collective agreement. But we were trying to come up with possibilities that could go in the collective agreement. Like if we could come up with if we could agree on an MOU on some kind of a priority system like that, it's a possibility that we might actually be able to get something in one of these hard instruments that would help. I mean, it wouldn't completely solve the problem. There may well be, all kinds of objections from others, but this is, some of the thinking that we're trying to do. So I'm not seeing any other hands. Victoria, did you want to add anything before you go on?
No, maybe just also another recommendation was to just collect more data on spouses in general, but that was my other point, or the other recommendation that was provided. All right, so if there's no other questions or comments, we'll continue with the following section. All right, so we will now move on to the FSDs. Because only preliminary research was done on the FSDs, I won't go as in-depth into these ones, but we'll definitely mention the issues identified as well as the recommendations. So the first one relates to FSD number 2 on definitions, and specifically the definition of spouse or common law partner. PAFSO found that it was not inclusive of persons with unconventional relationships, such as FSOs in polyamorous relationships. And so as a recommendation, this definition should be revised to be more inclusive of persons in non-conventional relationships, such as those with multiple partners, those in polyamorous relationships. The second one was FSD number 25 on shelter. So this related to persons with FSOs with disabilities, and research was done on the dual burden of women with disabilities and how they experience the dual burden of sexism and ableism. A lot of the conversations had to deal with housing and access to housing abroad. So that was the issue there. And then the recommendations was the creation of an FSD that particularly for FSOs with disabilities, as well as the adoption of a system to help people with disabilities figure out if they can apply to certain posts or not. So there are mission reports that do provide certain information, but by speaking with FSOs, those reports are not very consistent, and they do not have a disability section. So that would be a key recommendation for this one. Donc, le prochain, c'est le DSE 32 sur l'aide aux frais de garderie. Les parents avec des enfants d'âge préscolaire ne sont pas couverts par le FSD 32 seulement si les deux parents travaillent et si le conjoint travaille des journées complètes ou des demi-journées. Donc, on peut voir que ceci ne couvre pas les gens qui travaillent où le conjoint travaille, mais où il ne satisfait pas les journées complètes ou des demi-journées. Donc, ici, la recommandation, c'est que le DSE 32 devrait être révisé pour offrir plus de soutien aux enfants d'âge préscolaire et aux conjoints qui ne satisfait pas le critère de journée complète ou de demi-journée. The next one was FSD on education allowances. Here, the big problem was that was in relation specifically to special education allowance and needing to resubmit documents every year. So following multiple discussions with foreign service officers with children with disabilities, they stated that they need to resubmit medical documents to the FSD folk every year so that they can complete this process. It's an extremely lengthy process and it can take quite a bit of time. This means that children can just be sitting at home waiting to go to school because their documents are not being revised. So as a recommendation, here it's really important that the FSDs amend or we need to revise the FSD so that FSOs only need to provide the documentation for the duration of their post. Et dernièrement, les DSE sur la santé, donc particulièrement les FSD 9, 39, 41. Ici, les soins de santé désavantagent les membres de services extérieurs handicapés. Ici, on voit encore le lien entre les femmes handicapées qui subissent le double fardeau du sexisme et du capacitisme. Donc, ici, comme recommandation, la PAFSO devrait revoir les dispositions en matière de soins de santé pour les rendre plus inclusives, en particulier pour les membres FS handicapés ou les membres FS ayant des dépendants handicapés. So again, we have another pause just for some questions or comments. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm scanning to see if I see any hands.
Hi, Pam. It's Lori here.
Go ahead.
Hi. Good. I was just thinking about the daycare one was one, or the childcare one was one that sort of struck me, is that the basis of the FSDs are comparability with Ottawa. And how do you work with that? I mean, I think maybe the premise of comparability with Ottawa is something that needs to be worked on in the first place, because it's sometimes almost impossible to recreate something in some posts where you would even come close to being comparable to Ottawa. So, but I just wondered if that's a discussion you've had, is it, because that really is the basis of all of our FSDs, and that's what they bring up all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think that is something that we could talk about. But my only question would be right now is like, well, if that wasn't, if that isn't the baseline, then what would be, right? And I mean, I know, in some cases, like sometimes things come up where we are a little bit careful about what like how hard we push on some of the things, because if in some of these cases, like it would be impossible to have equivalent comparability with Ottawa in a really meaningful way, but we insist, like we try to, we insist that, this has to be done sort of no matter what the cost, or members, we say no, members cannot agree to accept a sort of lower standard or things like that. Like what might happen is that the employer comes back and says, well, you're right, we can't ensure comparability with Ottawa. And so therefore, if you have a child with a disability, or, depending on like what the condition is, you just can't go on posting to more than 2 or 3 places because we can't meet that standard. So, we always have to be thinking about these kinds of issues as well. And it does get quite complicated. I mean, Victoria's first original remit was to look at the collective bargaining, at the contract, because that's what's coming up for negotiation first. But it became clear, in so many of our early consultations that, the FSDs are really where the problem lies in so many cases that we've started that. But, bottom line is we've got a lot more to discuss on the FSDs for sure. It's, and it's long overdue. COVID has really made it clear that our FSDs are not really fit for purpose, that they, that they haven't been for quite a while, that they've been outdated in many ways. And, now COVID really brought that into sharp relief. So I think this round of consultations and then negotiations for the review will be more than just a review. I know from the employer side, they're also talking about like a comprehensive rethink, and that may be the moment to look at some of those comparability questions and what the standards are and how you arrive at these things. But watch this space is all I can say for now. So I'm not seeing any more hands. Anybody else?
Put my hand up, but apparently you can't see it.
Oh, sorry, I can't. Whoever's talking, go ahead.
Okay. Apparently I'm also supposed to be on video, but here we are. I think that more than most people, I'm sympathetic to the argument of wanting to be very careful about what we argue for so that we don't inadvertently undo the progress that we've already made. But at the same time, just picking up on your comment of, we don't want the department to come back and say, look, you just can't go on posting with a kid with disabilities. I would say that's effectively what happens already. And that's already what happens to FSOs with disabilities, where the department just says, look, well, and in fact, they don't even say it. They leave it to everybody to self-select themselves out. They don't provide a housing allowance that covers accessible accommodation for your staff quarters. They don't provide there isn't, a lot of our delegations don't have, or our missions abroad, in fact, the vast majority aren't actually accessible to either clients or staff with disabilities. I mean, that's effectively what winds up happening. And that's if you can get Health Canada clearance to go in the first place. And frankly, it puts the employer at a disadvantage as well, right? Because if you're applying in round one for assignments abroad, you don't actually know whether you're going to be able to going to be able to go to post and get Health Canada approval to do so until May or June of the next year. And then the mission winds up scrambling to find somebody if you actually get denied in the end. So I think that's ultimately what happens already. Right. And frankly, it's quite frustrating. And it's something that if we're not looking at I think it's worthwhile in this case for us to look at the comparables from comparable foreign services.
Right. So one thing, I mean, I don't want to sort of, I want to make sure Victoria gets through her whole presentation. Yeah. Because I think that this is something that we could have a whole separate discussion on. And Victoria and I have identified the whole issue of management of disabilities, members with disabilities, dependents. That is like a huge issue that we realize, I think, is coming out of all of this. This is the one big thing that I think, okay, next step, I would really like to see I want us to try to drill down on this more specifically. And I have an idea for a resource that may be able to help us do this within the next 8 months or so. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to sort of launch a project where we as PAFSO get a grip on the issue and then figure out where our value added is as PAFSO, if the areas that we can actually make direct intervention on, and where our best areas of leverage are. What we can do for people. But like things like this thing about the FSD, people having to recertify, resubmit all of their information for their kids' school every year. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And I think that is in a very practical way, some of the things that, okay, now we realize we can push for that and say, you should be able to do it once for your posting and then maybe attest each year that, your kid still has cerebral palsy or whatever. It's just ridiculous. There are some very concrete things that have come out of Victoria's research, which is still just preliminary, and then there are a lot more questions. And I think that if we can drill down on that, we can we'll be able to see where we can make a difference. But it's definitely a big area that I think we need to look at, seeing what we can do about, and it's affecting a lot more members than is initially obvious, right? Because especially if you consider our growing awareness of psychological health issues and how those affect people and how those are dealt with in the department. I mean, the file is huge and has direct impact on a lot of our membership. So I think it's something that we need to look at. So
Pam, I know you want to move on, but I just wanted to say one thing. I think the way that the FSDs are written are important, but then how it's interpreted and executed is more important, because as we've seen over the life of the FSDs, and certainly more in the last bit, is that it's the way that they're interpreting it and applying it that sometimes is the problem, not the way that it's written.
Exactly. And so, this is really coming to light, I mean, with COVID, but also with this analysis that Victoria has been doing. And one of the things that we're gonna, I think, look at it would be, probably in our collective agreement first, because that's also our framework for, then the FSDs are incorporated by reference into our collective agreement, but to see if we can get some kind of an agreement with the employer that we will apply a GBA plus intersectional approach to decision-making and interpretation of the collective agreement and other policy guidance. You know, at least if we can get that sort of as a principle, then we can start to, you know, get at some of these interpretation issues. But I agree with you. Like it's, you know, I've seen the same exact wording of some FSDs in my time being involved with PAFSO, and like when I was president before in 2009 to 2011. Now seeing that pretty much like the FSD with the same wording result in bringing totally different, vastly different results for members in terms of support, just because of interpretation and how, you know, the people in authority at GAC and Treasury Board have decided to look at the same language. So it's huge. It is huge. And it's something that we need to try to get our minds around. So if it's okay, I will let Victoria move on, because I think she's still got a fair bit of the presentation, and I just want to make sure we get through everything. But then when we're done, we can also leave some time for some more questions and discussion at the end. So if it's okay with everybody, Victoria, you ready to, you feel free to respond to anything I said, and then hop on with the rest of your presentation.
Perfect. I think I'll just continue. I think those were great answers for sure. So we'll go on to the GBA Plus data strategy for PAFSO. And so to conduct an effective intersectional GBA Plus analysis, PAFSO should use a disaggregated data strategy. Disaggregated data is data that is broken down into detailed subcategories to reveal how gender, for example, intersects with other factors such as visible minority, Aboriginal status, person with disabilities, which is highlighted in Figure 4. This is an example used from the Women's Network at Global Affairs Canada. As stated by Ashley Christopherson, a researcher at the Equality Challenge Unit, quantitative data is not always organized in a way that easily facilitates intersectional analysis. Institutions will be accustomed to collecting and considering data on a number of staff or students who are women and the number who are minority ethnic, for example, but not necessarily on the number who are women and minority ethnic. So if we look at this figure, we can see that the data collected was on women, but that there was also analysis on women, visible minority, women with Aboriginal status, and women intersecting with persons with disabilities. And so here we can see that 18.2% of women in the Foreign Service identify as also being members of visible minority groups. This leads us to ask a question: are there barriers to access to the Foreign Service career for women who belong in visible minority groups? The absence of a disaggregated strategy, so for example, only looking at women and highlighting the 700, would undermine PAFSO's ability to ask these intersectional questions. All right, this segment was a little short, but are there any questions or comments on the data strategy portion?
I am not, oh, I see Logan, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm eating my lunch. Could I ask, and I don't know if you guys have considered this and maybe we'll get to it later, but given the contentious discussion on the Facebook group lately about minority language group and the disadvantages of Francophone Canadian Foreign Service officers in relation to Anglophone Canadian Foreign Service officers, could that be included as data sets?
Victoria, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think if PAFSO is willing to do that, I think that that is a great strategy to adopt, and it's definitely an intersectional lens that should be adopted if they want the GBA plus analysis to be complete. I think that's a key component. So yeah, great comment, and I think that's something that PAFSO should pursue.
And I think we did have a piece on this, right? In the analysis, I know about language training and official languages.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing anything. Okay, let's go.
Okay, I'll continue. We only have the conclusion left. So, la PAFSO devrait travailler avec l'employeur et d'autres syndicats pour aborder les, ici il y a 12 questions, je m'excuse, 12 questions fondamentales énumérées dans ce cadre d'ACS+. Et juste pour noter, les problèmes d'ACS+, mis en évidence et analysés dans ce cas, n'englobent pas tous les problèmes d'ACS+, au sein du service extérieur. C'est seulement un point de départ. Donc, beaucoup de questions à poser, beaucoup plus de recherches à faire. C'est vraiment juste un cadre d'analyse. So thank you so much. Merci. And if there's any questions, maybe we can have a question period right now. All right, I see Julia's hand raised.
Hi, thanks. So first of all, just like really interesting presentation. Thank you for that. I guess I had two quick questions because I didn't catch it in the presentation, and so maybe it wasn't in the scope of what you were looking at, or maybe it ended up not being relevant. But I was hoping you could speak to which or whether that's the case. And one was whether there was any kind of thought to consider in the FSD review or in other areas the issue of officers with kind of double burden of childcare, but also parent or elder care, whether that came up. And then similarly, whether, you know, I can imagine it would have been difficult to look at in this context, but the issue of hardship postings and whether there were specific GBA plus considerations around hardship postings, or, and you know, to be transparent, I'm coming from the FSIA community where we tend to have a higher proportion of hardship postings, but wondering if that came up at all. Thank you.
There we go. Hold on, I can't see. There's too many hands up. I can't see if I'm muted or not. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I couldn't see my camera for a second. Okay, so yes, the double burden did come up and the triple workday did come up, but not in the elder care context. So that wasn't in the scope of my research. And then for hardship postings, again, not really, it didn't really come up during the individual interviews that I conducted, but thank you for that comment. And I think I'll definitely note it as something to look at and further investigate for PAFSO. Tita, I think you were next. I'm not sure, hold on here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I joined, thank you for your presentation, Victoria. It's super appreciated and all the great work that you've done. I joined late, unfortunately, so I don't know if it came up, but did you present on anything with respect to the maternity leave and parental leave? I understand our parental leave, maternity leave policy hasn't been updated in many, many years. So I was wondering and kind of hoping that this would be an opportunity to kind of update it according to, you know, what everyone else in Canada is getting, you know. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. There is going to be a final report that accompanies the presentation. So if you want to go and read on that section and read up on the research, you can go and look at the report that will accompany this PowerPoint deck.
Yeah, we'll make Victoria's final report available to everybody in a couple of weeks after we have a chance to get translation and so on. Sorry, I think there was somebody.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. There was another hand somewhere. Kate, was it you? Did you have a question? Or anybody else? I thought I saw a third hand that went down somewhere.
It might have been me. It was on the chat, and I guess it's just a general. One is a question, one's a comment. The question would be, can we share this recording, and will this report be shared with the other government departments that are covered by the FSDs but aren't covered by PAFSO? So I've already had one request from people elsewhere to say, hey, wait a second, the FSDs cover us too. Can we see this?
So we will, I mean, if you get requests like that, I'd appreciate it if you would direct them to me, and then we will share the presentation with them. I mean, it's none of this research, it's not a secret, but we're PAFSO, we work for FS and the interests of the FS group. And so that's the focus and target of our research. Of course, when there are negotiations, you know, at the National Joint Council, there's, you know, the employer is there, there's somebody there who represents EXs, there's someone who represents the military and other departments, and they all have their piece and their say. And, you know, certainly we're not as PAFSO out to, you know, to harm the interests of anybody else, but we don't represent them. So when we're doing this research is focused on our members, because that's our mandate. And that's our span of authority. So yeah, if people approach you and want to discuss this research or want copies of things, I would appreciate it if you would refer them to me, and I'll get back to them directly. Logan, did you have your hand up? Sorry, it went up and then went down. Now it's up again. Okay.
Oh, yeah. So I was just thinking about a couple of things running through my mind about things that have come up recently in sort of the public forum, and wanted to bring people's attention to stuff like the discussion about chopsticks in the pack-up kits and other essential items on the MAT list that are not the standard white Canadian key household items. I'm thinking also of like a rice cooker. Many other non-white Canadian cultures require a rice cooker. I use it all the time. So that kind of thing, I think we could turn our minds to that. Another thing that sprang to mind recently was all of the people wondering about, sure, the department has allowed us to take a lot of extra baggage to make up for the fact that we're not having an air shipment, but nobody's helping families get to the airport. Like, what if you're a single parent or whatever, and yeah, each member of your family can have 5 bags, but how are you transporting them? There's not really an extra fund for hiring a van and a porter. That kind of thing.
Some of these things, I mean, I appreciate your comments. I mean, and I think that when we do the triennial survey, we will be drilling down with people to ask them for, more details on what's important. But this is really strategic level planning, like helping individuals get to the airport. I mean, I think our level of thing would be to say, look, there should be attention paid to make sure that in travel, everyone has support for making their necessary travel, whatever that is. But we're not going to be drilling down to the level of, you should have a big van and 2 burly people at the mission to carry your bags. Like that kind of detailed micro level is not going to be in the scope of this exercise.
Sure. And I just mean, like, you fix one thing, but you don't notice that you create other.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we're trying to set up is, to get a sense, establish a framework that will allow us to know when that's happening. Right, to have an analysis that will require us all to work through everything, so we see those small things, so the decision makers see those small things rather than thinking we've got a grip on it and finding out that 1/3 of our members are worse off than they were before. So yeah. But definitely, I mean, those are the kinds of things, right, that affect people's lives and need to be addressed for sure. Anybody, maybe what I'll do is, I'm not seeing any other hands for comments, but what I'll do, I think we can conclude the official sort of portion of this. So I am just stopping